Hi everyone. I'm here to introduce you to the use and interpretation of your score sheets. I won't go much into the different measures other than to just help orient you to the feedback you've been given. So what you've received, and you can see on the screen, is a score sheet. And what I want to do is walk you through what these different scales are, so that you can kind of make sense of them. Now, these scales parallel the measures over here, and by and large, I tried to put them in the same order so that you could see where to find the items on each construct. So, the information on the right I'll refer to occasionally, but it's really to give you the items that match up with the different scores here. But this is your one-page summary. So what I want to do is have you help explain to you what these terms refer to and how you can score your own measure and begin to look at what might be most interesting for you to attend to, either in general or for reflection or for assignment, whatever. So let's start here. I will say what I want to do and use this as the starting piece for is address a couple of questions. So if we look over here on the side, I think we can use these measures in a couple of interesting ways that may or may not be done directly in your class, but you can do on your own. So the first thing is, this is going to help you. If you look at your syllabus, these are some of the things that we cover in the class. I want to help you think about the implications for Erikson's theory, which I think is wonderful for thinking about lifespan development, right? So we're going to look at the implications for Erikson's scales in particular, and then try to link them to what they tell us about development now. So here are some learning goals, but here are some of the key objectives you'll see in your course that are tied to what accrediting bodies want to make sure you have covered in this class. And so one of those is to give opportunities for students to learn how to apply course material to their personal philosophy and future practice. So that really is the benefit or the real intention of this activity and sharing with you all this data. Another is to get you to think critically about measures and understand what content validity refers to so that you can really understand how a scale might be used in research, but it might not actually be a very good scale for all people or even for you. And that any measure you might use in your practice or data you might draw on, I want to reinforce the idea that you want to look carefully at what's being asked, because sometimes measures don't measure what they say they measure, or they don't measure for all people. So another issue here that we want to focus on is critiquing research and thinking about when it applies and when it doesn't apply. And we're going to do that by acquainting you with the concepts and the constructs from human development and the variables that measure it. Okay? Now, as we roll through this, we'll talk about the difference between stage theories of development and more linear measures of development. And a great example of that is attachment. Attachment theory, which is the first set of constructs here, right, is a construct that's assumed to be formed basically around social factors and social experiences in childhood, and manifests in a different type of attachment, and that has consequences over time where it continues unless something intervenes to alter it on a trajectory. So that's a construct that could persist over time. There are also constructs that suggest different phenomenon or stage theories where there are wholly different experiences or constructs one after another. But as we look at the Erikson scales, and we have two sets of those. One's called the EPSI, right? And you look over here, that's the scale by Rosenthal et al., called the Erikson Psychosocial Stage Inventory. So these are the measures of Erikson's stages that you see measured by that scale. And then Ocean Plug also are reported in the literature with their measures. One of the things I want to introduce you to is the idea that I find it really interesting to look at these. For each construct, you'll see different, like we look at trust for the EPSI and trust measured with the Ocean Plug scale. You'd think, well, they should measure the exact same thing. You should be fairly similar on those because they're both measuring trust. Well, they use different items, and so they generate different scores, and we'll see where there are some differences there. But one of the things that I think is important is to figure out which type of score fits. With this set, you'll see, if you look at them, that, for example, the intimacy scales for EPSI and the intimacy scales measuring the Erikson stage of intimacy at these two time points, they differ in pretty significant ways. If you go down and look, so let's go to page 9 and 11, just as an example, to look at these two scales. We come over here to 9 and 11, and we go down to the intimacy scale. Look at this one. This is a great example. Item number 9 in that measure says, I'm ready to get involved with a special person. So that clearly implies you're not in a relationship with somebody, right? Or I want, it's important to me to be open. Actually, this one item is the main one that strikes me as particularly not relevant if you're in a committed relationship right now and you want this measure of intimacy to be a measure of the intimacy you have currently in that committed relationship, right? If we look at the Ocean Plug, however, for their intimacy scale, right here, you have, I have a feeling of complete togetherness with someone. I share my private thoughts with someone. So here, you would get a higher score if you're in a relationship with someone, right? Whereas on the other one, you would get a higher score if we take the average, and usually these are all averages. You respond on a 1 to 5 scale that you disagree as a low score and you agree as a high score, and then all those items are averaged to get a score. Well, if you're in a relationship, your Ocean Plug score should be higher, assuming that you engage in intimacy things like intimacy actions or activities like I share my private thoughts, right? Notice when you see a asterisk, these are negatively worded, so that means they got recoded in the opposite way. So when it says, I feel that no one has ever known the real me, that's going to be rescored automatically in here to really be asking you the opposite. That is, I feel someone knows the real me. So anyway, these items in the Ocean Plug scale are more likely to measure intimacy if you're in a relationship, whereas in that intimacy scale for the EPSI, it would be a better indicator if you're not in a relationship. And that's the real importance of you looking at these items for each scale. Now, the attachment measures, I want to go through and show you where each of the measures are, what you see there, and where you find them on this scale, and then how they go together. Another thing I'm going to show you is that there's a group of scales that are relatively new, but were created because I kind of need them for one of the assignments where we actually look at what might you have really experienced early on. Because if you notice that when we talk about the measures of the Erikson stages, like let's say if you look at the trust scale over on the right side for the EPSI, all of these items ask you about how you act and feel and think now, today, in your life, assuming a level of trust was developed early on and it has persisted over time. There's a linear relationship between the early experiences of trust and the amount of trust you have right now. There's kind of two problems with that, at least from my reasoning, which is it does tell you how trusting perhaps you are now, but it doesn't really tell us what happened back then. So one of the assignments that I have has you look at what experiences you think you had as a child to see to what extent that early trust experience predicts your adult attachment, right? And most of these measures up here for attachment are based on your attachment experiences as an adult, not as a child. So we find ourselves in a bit of a tautology where we're assuming the past predicts the future because our measures of past are actually measures of the present, trust in the present. So for this class, I took two measures. I tried to come up with, in prior classes, measures of trust, autonomy, initiative, and identity that include items that are what you remember or you think happened as a kid. And you have to then look at these and you'll find them. So let me go back to the first page on the items list, and you see that on the first page of the items list, or second page actually, I tell you that these retrospective Erickson stages are on page 22, and it's for these scales. There's also a retrospective connectedness scale here, retrospective adolescent connectedness, and these are high school connectedness, and I'll come back and talk about those in a minute. But they also ask, at that time, what do you recall? And that was my attempt. All of these in gray, actually not these two, but all the others in gray are really retrospective. What was it like back then that you think? And that way the assignment where I have people think about their early experience and their adult experience and how closely those are aligned, meaning are they both in the same range of being average with the group, with the class, or are they high or low, which I'll talk about in a second. How do those relate to the early experiences? And then can we identify experiences in between that may explain the continuity of early experiences to later experiences as a function of social factors or change-related, sage-related changes that occurred in between childhood and adulthood. So if we look at these retrospective items right here, we go to the end of this document, it's on page 22, we will see that there are items we came up with, and they may not be the best items in the world, honestly, but they were an attempt to try to capture when you were young, right? What were the experiences that are related to the establishment of trust that you had, or autonomy that you recall or remember from stories you were told about you as a kid, and even initiative. When I was a child, I was not a follower. I went outside by myself. I was an adventurous child. So at least these items are about childhood and your recollections of childhood. Whether or not those are actually true, they at least are consistent with how you understood yourself as a child. So here we've got items, and we made these up over several courses. And so you have to assess whether or not these hold together and are consistent with your understanding of things like the term initiative or trust. So, to recap, in this list of measures, all of them but the last few have been used in prior studies and have some history of reliability and validity, evidence. And so I'll walk through which of those we have. But these are the retrospectives are these connectedness scales and these trust and identity scales. So there's who you are now, and there is who were you earlier. That's one distinction that's worth keeping in mind. Largely, you can just look at these gray ones to know these are your retrospectives. I'll change this to make clear that if we get to this discussion of the growth mindset, it's a very popular construct right now, growth mindset and fixed mindset, related to mindset theory, those are actually current day. They're at the bottom of the list because not everybody's covering those in class. So what I want to do is walk you through this measure here a little bit, okay, and how to use it. So the first thing is, this is a blank version, but what you got is one with scores on it, where your scores are in this column E, and then what's left for you to do is to determine are you high or low. Now, I could have done that automatically, but I wanted you to look at it and do it yourself so that you attend to this and you see variations, because sometimes you'll be close to being high or low, but you don't hit that threshold that we're using. And the threshold is the standard deviation. So, if we have a distribution of scores, right, like so, and the mean's in the middle, one standard deviation on each side captures the 68% of the class in this case. So if you fall outside one standard deviation, either higher or lower, then you are higher than 2/3 of the class, or you're lower than 2/3 of the class. You're not extreme like 2 standard deviations, which would be you're higher than 95% of the class. But the majority, right, 68, 69% of the class is different from you. So that's just the way we decided to characterize this. So as you go through, what you want to do is look at what's the mean score for the class, and then what's your score, which will be here. And then this is the standard deviation, just so you know it. You don't have to use it because I already computed what is the mean for the class minus a standard deviation, what is the mean for the class plus a standard deviation. So all you got to do is look at your number and say, is it lower than this or is it higher than this? And then you can put high or low here to indicate which ones are high or low. And then you can use that as a starting point to then come over to this list and look at those measures and say, is this a good measure for me based on the items and you're thinking about how you responded to them. So let's go to an example here. Here's an example I just randomly pulled from the class. Okay, so this person, I'm going to just say it's you, even though your scores are going to be different for all but one of you. This score 2 is right in between. It's just very much like the mean, right? So nothing significant or unusual about this. On the next measure, so this measure is a category one, so it's not a great one to use the mean with, frankly, because this says, were you in the category of 1, secure, 2, fearful avoidant, 3, preoccupied, or 4, dismissively avoidant. But then we asked you, for each of the descriptions we gave, how much like that description are you? So this person did not find themselves. They put themselves as number 2, right? That score here refers to fearful avoidant. So this person obviously has the highest score on fearful avoidant. It's higher than the mean, and it's higher than one standard deviation, which is this for that scale. Oops. It's higher than one standard deviation plus the mean. So here, this person is high, right? On the next one, how preoccupied are you? They are close. So if you want to, you can put things like close. But I'm just going to go through and just grab the ones that are high and low. If you don't have a lot of highs or lows, you may want to look back and say, which ones are you close to being close to high? But we'll just go through these now and put high and low. Okay, so 5 is not outside one standard deviation above the mean, so we're not going to put anything there. This 1 is below, so we're going to put low. So this person, in terms of these categories, is high on fearful avoidance and low on dismissive avoidance. There's 2 more measures of attachment here, and what you'll see in this list is a number of measures of the same constructs, so you can get a sense of how consistently you were scored in a category. So here we see, in terms of attachment-related anxiety, and you think, well, what is that? Well, remember, you can go over to this list and you can find it. Attachment-related anxiety is described on page 4. And notice here, the range is going to be different, and I tried to include the range of the scales. So on this scale, as it's used in the literature, it's a 1 to 7 possibility, whereas on the Sony scale we'll go to next, it has a, where's Sony, right? Oh, Sony's 1 to 7 too. Sorry. So down most of the scales, like the Ocean Plug down here, are a 1 to 4. The 1 to 7s are fairly rare, but in the first few measures that you see, the range of options is 1 to 4. That's why these mean scores can vary. And so you don't want to look at those and say, oh, but my trust score here was a 5. Actually, look at this. I'm sorry. So with the EPSI, it's also 1 to 7. It's the Ocean Plug that's 1 to 4. Do you see this range right there? So the range is 1 to 4. So if you look at trust here, your score was 5.08. And that's close to high, but it's not high. You go down to trust measured by the Ocean Plug, you're 3.5. You're again just below the cutoff. You might even put high there. Intimacy, that's that one that varied for the two groups. So intimacy for this person was not outside one standard deviation. So it falls in the normal range for this person. And intimacy here is relatively low. But remember, whether those scales are valid and good indicators of your intimacy is going to depend on whether the items here fit you compared to the items here. And for some reason, I always get this mixed up, but I think it's the intimacy EPSI that is, I'm ready for a close relationship. And this one is the quality of the close relationship that you are assumed to be in. So I really want to highlight the idea that on many of these constructs, you want to check and see, does this fit for me? Does this match for me? Okay, so we're going down the list here, and it's fairly quick. I may even make some errors because I haven't done this yet. Are these outside this range? 4? No. 3.5? No. 4? No. 3? Yep. High, because it's just outside the range for, it's higher than this. This one is lower than this, so it's low. Right? Sorry. And we continue. This one is not outside the range, not outside the range, close high, close high, close to being high, right in the middle, in the middle, in the middle, very close to being high, right? That's almost high-ish. This one is high because it's outside. So this one's high. And we go down like so. 4.5, 3.2, 4.2, 3.5, 3.5. That's close. Scroll down. 4.5. That's going to be, I'm going to copy this high. I can just paste those at least. So where's it? 4.5? Yeah. So on exploration, high. Ethnic identity belonging, high. Other group orientation, average. High-ish. Okay, so we keep scrolling down. Measures, looking for the high ones. Ooh, that's that high-ish. That's so close. I gotta put high-ish there. And that's for one of the generativity scales. So you get what I'm doing here, and you go down and find where you are low and where you're high. So this is now in the retrospective scales. And again, I'm looking here to see where these things fall. Oops, let me do that twice. High. Best just to go through and not look at the scales immediately. Just do this and come back later. Now we're in the connect. These are current connectedness. These actually probably should not. These are not gray. They're new scales, but they're not retrospective. They are current. High. Average. Ooh, that's high-ish, huh? I'm gonna put. Now this. Here's an interesting one, right? Where we have the retrospective trust. If I remember from earlier, the ONP was high-ish, right? So that gives evidence that our measure of trust correlates with the current measure of trust. That's some sort of concurrent validity evidence. Good for us. Okay, average, high, growth mindset. That's good. And low. I like this person's scores here. Low. All right, so now we got our highs and lows. So the thing to do for assignments and for next steps is really to take a look at these measures and decide which ones are worth your looking more closely into. So what I have here and what I'm going to do for the rest of this presentation is, again, just walk you through the different groupings. So what I want to do now is come over here and say, to tell you which ones are the Erickson scales, okay? Just so you know, and then I'll make this scale available to you, and you can go find this stuff if you for some reason get confused. So the Erickson scales are, the stages are these two groups, and I'm just going to put them in, I don't know, light green. So these are the Erickson scales that are from literature, and so I'm going to color this green, or fill this with green, if it'll let me fill it. No, I don't see fill. I see, yep, there's fill. Okay, so, right, these two are Erickson's stages. But there's also the ones we made in the class. So these also are Erickson stages. They're just the retrospective ones. So we come down here to these Erickson stages, and that should be it for the Erickson constructs, except that generativity is a construct in the Erickson stages, and so a measure of generativity, but that's called the Loyola scale, falls in here, and it's not exactly as Erickson described it. It's as the authors of this measure. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight that one, the Loyola generativity scale, as also. How do we do this? Oh, right there. Another measure of the Erickson scales. You could say that identity, because Erickson had an identity scale, that this also falls in there. So we'll go ahead and put identity in there, even though ethnic identity differs from the standard identity in that it's dependent upon your racial group membership. Now, if you look at the items, you'll see what I mean. And so the scale is more or less relevant for individuals based on their experience in cross-race groups and the degree to which they've thought about the meaning of ethnic group membership, which some people have the luxury of not doing because they're not exposed to many of the consequences of race that they need to address and make sense of, or at least not early in life. Okay, so I think those are our Erickson scales. I'm going to save this real quick. Now, let's go to our attachment. Okay, so attachment scales. We already discussed these. This is a categorical attachment scale. I'm going to color this. So I'm going to do something red, for like love, but I don't see any red. We'll just try light blue. So light blue for our attachment scales. Now, all of these are actually measures of attachment. So I'm going to color them all. And they fall into two groups, two different measures, but they actually both come from the same theory, and I think originally the same authors. So we come up here and we'll see that Brennan, Clark, and Shaver are credited with the paragraph descriptions of attachment that you say which one is best like me, the categorical, and then of each of those categories, how well does each category represent me. But Brennan was also involved in the experiences and close relationship scale. So all of these come from the same theoretical family of measuring adult attachment. So let's make that blue. How's that? We scroll down, and you could say that trust is a measure of attachment. And so I'm going to color those because they are measuring that same process and period. And then there's also, of course, that retrospective trust. Remember, I was going to take these out because these college connectedness ones are not retrospective, nor is the mindset. Okay, so now the light blue, we know those are the ones related to adult attachment, and in this case, memories of child attachment processes. Even though, for example, all of the connectedness scales, in my opinion, derive from or are built on attachment experiences, but they're also built on later experiences of relatedness and belonging with peers, teachers, and opportunities in the environment. So they're not exactly the same, so I'm not going to color them blue. Let's go to self-development. The self-development theories are largely measured by the Sony scale, self, objects, needs, inventory. I'm going to do that purple. I don't really get purple, do I? Let's see. I'll do yellow. Okay. So autonomy is the period when the self is developing, it's differentiating from the parent, right? So I'm going to highlight that these two autonomy measures, as well as the one from the retrospective, are measuring similar processes. And we'll look in a later video at to what extent these autonomy measures correlate with those scales of that time period. Now, those are the two main ones. Again, these are not retrospective. I'm going to take them off, right? You'll get that hammered into your head. And then go back up, and we want to say, well, is anything else here related to the autonomy stage or to self-development processes and self-development theory? And yes, in fact, these two measures here are about what happens when autonomy is not appropriately developed, and hypersensitive narcissism and pathological concerns are constructs in adulthood that stem from problems of self-object needs, which is why you'll see the description in the articles on these related to needs for mirroring and idealizing and twinship, self-development needs that occur early in life. So this is the most direct reflection of the self-object stages and self-object theories, but autonomy as measured or described by Erikson and measured in the Erikson scales is also about did we develop sufficiently autonomous self at this period? And if not, low scores on these should predict low scores on these if the construct is consistent over the lifespan, right? Great. So that's self-development. Then there are the defenses. I just will put these out here. The defenses are this group right here, right? And they are developmental in the sense that the immature defenses are frankly tied to poor self-development, theoretically. So we could go back to the self-development stages and we could put in here that, where is it? The immature defenses should be highest when these needs are high and these constructs are low. So, immature defenses should be high when these constructs are high in adulthood. Okay? If you hear kids screaming in the background, it's because it's Sunday afternoon after Halloween and kids got a lot of candy to burn off, and so that's what you're hearing in the background. Hope that makes sense. So the immature defenses are about problems in self-development. So these scores, for example, this person's in the middle here and is not high on any of these. So our example person, this one's a little high, right? So they're high here, but in terms of immature defenses, they're not high. They are actually low, however, on mature defenses, which is what you would expect. So they're not excessively high in the use of immature defenses, but they are low in the use of mature defenses. As you would expect, somebody who is low in, who has high self-development needs, and uses a high number of immature defenses, typically correlates with a low number of mature defenses. So that's consistent. But here, interestingly, we see this person is actually high on autonomy, high-ish on autonomy here. And they don't fall in a worrisome range on these constructs. So this pattern here suggests that the individual is high in their denial of their need to idealize others, to associate with their strength and power, and affiliate with people who can provide a source of direction, consistency, strength, as described in the self-development theory, and which are reflective of these two needs for twinship and idealizing. They don't have high needs for these, but they do have a relatively high need to deny that they need these. So, okay, let me go now to one other thing on the defenses. Neurotic defenses, right? They are theorized to evolve after self-development processes have occurred. So the neurotic defenses are actually tied to one of Erikson's stages, which is the stage of initiative versus guilt. Neurotic defenses are about guilt. Immature defenses are about shame and doubt, right? And shame is the core construct of poor self-development. Neurotic guilt reflects failures in the period of development that is reflected in Erikson's stages of initiative. So I'm going to color these some color. I'm going to color them purple. Purple? Oh, I didn't mean to color that. I don't want that. I want the font to be purple. So initiative, and initiative should all reflect or relate to neurotic guilt. So we go back over to defenses. These neurotic defenses should be high among folks who struggled with initiative. Now, this person's scores are low to average, and their initiative scores are average and average. Go down to the one down here, initiative. Yeah, average. So nothing striking there, but I want to just highlight neurotic defenses connect to that stage of development. I'll just highlight it here. Initiative being purple. Initiative being related to neurotic defenses. And I guess I should put, if we're going to put immature defenses here, we could link those to that stage here of autonomy, right? So we're linking the immature defenses with that construct, as well as these constructs are related to immature defenses. They are another manifestation of immature defenses. Now, another thing I might as well just point out here is these two constructs of empathy and perspective taking are required for, they're related to mature defenses. So I'm going to go ahead and make the mature defenses blue here, and we can see that people who are high in mature defenses, or in this case, low in mature defenses, probably are going to be low, or should be low, in these constructs as well. The capacity for perspective taking and empathy are dependent upon the foundation of these earlier developments of autonomy and initiative, and they're critical for intimacy as well as identity development, but definitely intimacy. So, slightly low mature defenses, and here we have fairly high empathy and average perspective taking. Generativity also is an expression of mature defenses, of giving to others. So we would expect higher scores here, and that's highish, right? Otherwise, those are fairly average. It's a little lowish, but I won't put lowish. Okay, so that gets on to our defenses and how they relate to developmental stages. Next one, current. So which of these reflects who we are currently? So I'm just going to highlight that all of these, as you know, are about what is measuring me now. This also is me now, assuming that's how you responded to it, and then the growth mindset. These are all now, and then the grays are retrospective, thinking back to a time. That's redundant because we just did that, so I'll probably just delete that page. But notice on the bottom here, Excel files are tricky because there is another couple of tabs to the right. So you got to click on that little button on the right to see the other scales. So connectedness scales. If you go to connectedness scales, you'll see that the connectedness theories here are connectedness. I'm do a different color, orange. These are all the connectedness scales. Connectedness to me is both an extension of attachment processes, but because it's also informed by opportunities in the environment and later experiences with peers and siblings, neighbors, teachers, coaches, peer groups. Connectedness reflects an action or a volitional choice. It's a response to experiences of relatedness and belonging. And one thing I will talk about in a later slide are the distinctions between conventional connectedness, and that's a connectedness that really is highly related to valuing adults and the world that they value, conventional worlds of adults. And then there is the unconventional or sort of social peer focused. So I'm going to highlight that there is a group of measures, and I've already seen that this bears out in the data pretty well with this class, where connectedness to one's peers, I'm going to put that in red, yeah. Connectedness to one's peers, which is predictive of risk-taking, is reflected in these constructs. Sometimes the peers is a funny one, because peers is really peers, whereas friends are the folks you play around with and do silly stuff, and neighborhood is where you tend to play around with others and do silly stuff. This peer scale is as much about classmates, and I almost called it that because it almost measures that, and so sometimes it correlates with the conventional. I'm going to put conventional in green because the conventional scales measure one's acceptance of, valuing of, caring about, and working hard in worlds that matter to adults and worlds that are relevant to my future. So in all of these, they typically predict school engagement, school success, low risk taking, and when these green ones, the conventional connectedness, are low, and the unconventional connectedness, the ones in red, are high, those are kids who engage in a lot of risk taking. So here we see this person was low on connectedness to neighborhood, but high on connectedness to friends, and high, yeah, and high on self in the present. So something kept them from spending time with their friends in their neighborhood, and it might be that their friends were largely in school. this person is connected to school. They care about school and they spend a lot of time working hard at school. They have a average to high connectedness to self in the future, so they weren't actually doing more than the average kid their age to think about their future, but they engaged in the world of reading, which is such a predictor of future orientedness, and they're highly connected to teachers. So this is kind of, Z, I don't want that. Go back here. So high. So this is a kid highly engaged with teachers, not so, also high with peers. So this is, I have an example in a later presentation I do where I've nicknamed a person with this profile Sheila Get Ahead. So that's somebody who is very engaged in the academic world, even more than the family. And this person is active in school, cares about school activities like reading, and their friends were probably also like that. So in this case, this person's friends were more conventional. I could almost color that green. And she or he, the connectedness to the self in the present means how that person viewed themselves in high school was probably largely based on how she or he did in school, was seen by teachers and classmates, such that these should probably be green for this person. Because some people, the conventional worlds all come together, most of the connected worlds come together. But for others, they're very distinct. Some kids wrestle with very different peer friends, outside school relationships, and inside school, and they have to reconcile with that at some point in time. This person, then, if we look at their connectedness at college here now, we see them as being high on connectedness to advisors. Now, this scale was developed for working with undergrads. So in the case of this person, I'm not sure who advisors refers to, frankly, because we have advisors in the departments that help in some ways, but I'm not sure who that would be. Maybe it would be faculty advisors, but there is a connectedness to professors, and that's not necessarily high. So that person would need to look and say, who are they thinking of when they scored these high? Because their overall connectedness to UTSA is actually a little bit low. So I'm intrigued by this person. Low score on connectedness to UTSA, high score on connectedness to advisors, and average on connectedness to professors. Could talk about that another day. Highish on trust, average on autonomy, average on initiative, and relatively average on identity. So, but these are our connectedness scales in the orangish color. Now, identity, we've covered that earlier a little bit, but I'll just highlight that one difference is that I've already told you that identity is an Erickson stage, right? And we're going to color it green. So we got two specific measures of identity that are universal. Then we have ethnic identity, the degree to which one engages in exploration or has explored the meaning of ethnicity for their life, and then how much they engage in ethnic behaviors. This person is high. I would not be surprised if this person was African American, Latino, of an ethnic minority group, because usually folks who have thought about this either are from a ethnic or racial group that is in the minority, or nationwide, or they grew up in a context where race was a highly significant and salient thing for them. Whereas many Anglos don't score really high on this. They haven't spent as much time doing this relative to others. Now, the other identity, though, if we go down to connectedness, self in the present is a connectedness to scale, but that's retrospective. That was in high school. Remember, this person is high. And then connectedness to self in the future, and this person was not high, or average. It's interesting. I would have thought the score would be a little higher, given that those other things like connectedness to peers, teachers, teachers, and school were high, right? That usually suggests this will be high, but it didn't. There could have been a lack of opportunities to do things that were related to the future, or the person might be thinking the things I did back then to prepare for the future didn't prepare me for what I'm doing now, so I'm not going to score those highly. But self in the present is another identity scale. right? It's a future identity, whereas this one is a present identity scale. And then there is the retrospective identity scale here, where the person is average. That's more consistent. These two scales should go together. Retrospective identity and self in the future identity, an identity that's future focused, whereas this identity was present focused. And it's interesting that it ties with this person explored the meaning of race or ethnic group membership in their life and was high in self in the present. So in high school, they felt positively viewed by their peers and probably their peers in the school setting, and that was important to them. Okay, generativity. We've talked about that. There are these generativity scales for the Erickson measures, only on the Ocean plug. Then there's the Loyola measure of generativity, right? This person is highish there, and they are highish, lowish, highish, and low. But there's also, no, that's it. That's all for the generativity. We didn't do a retrospective generativity because generativity usually comes later in life, and most of us are not at that point in life. And lastly, the mindset is the final group, and that's based on Dweck's mindset theory, which is the degree to which you believe you can develop intelligences, both scientific, social, and otherwise. You can develop skills. You're not just hardwired, so you're high and low. This person's got a good outlook on this. They're likely to believe that with effort, this person believes they can learn anything and do anything, and that people are not limited or by a fixed degree of intelligence. So, very nice profile, whoever this person is overall. I hope this introduction to these scales and how you use them, how you look for the high and the low is relevant to you, and helps you see the way you can use these scores to see how you fit relative to your class, and people who are like your peers, and where you can find more information on each of those scales here, and how we've set the stage for you to now use some of these to do a critique of research in the literature, right? So that's what we'll do in some later videos. So I sure hope this thing recorded. I'm going to try and stop it now, and we'll find a time to field questions you might have about this. All right? Take care.